Hi, my name is Dale Brown, and I am the senior pastor at Community Church at Ocean Pines. It is just so much fun to be the pastor of this church. I have the best job ever. I love my job. It's made that way because I have a wonderful God to serve, but I also have wonderful people. So welcome to this podcast where we're going to focus on things that are connected to Ash Wednesday, which marks the beginning of Lent, and to Lent itself. And I'd like to make some suggestions about what you and I might do to not lose this time, but to grab this time, which has been thought of throughout the history of the church in ways that call for deeper discipleship and faithful witness and service to our loving God. So thank you for joining me, and let's begin. Ash Wednesday, as a worship experience, began sometime in the 10th century in the history of the church. And for many, many years, it was a service that reminded us of two things: our own human mortality and our sinfulness before God. One of the key verses in this experience is Psalm 51. I encourage you to read Psalm 51, which is David's prayer for God's forgiveness after his terrible, horrible sin with Bathsheba. Sometimes we as men want to make light of what David did. But what David did was basically take Bathsheba's body for his own purposes. He had all the power, and she had none. He was king, and she was subject to him. And so she did what she was forced to do. Bathsheba might be thought of as a victim, and David the aggressor. So this is a serious sin, and David knows that this type of sin will remove him from the presence of God. And so he prays to God in Psalm 51 to forgive his sin, to remove his iniquity, and to remain with David, God's presence to remain with David. He prays, "Create in me a clean heart and renew a right and steadfast or faithful spirit, that I may in turn move from being a sinner to being one who teaches others not to sin." David's prayer is heartfelt and sincere, recognizing both his own mortality and his own sinfulness before God. Ted, one of the things that's a reality is that Ash Wednesday has the most depressing of all the liturgy in the life of the church, in the year, the Christian calendar. And so this morning at 8 o'clock, I was out at the carport, and as people drove through, I've handed them, because of wanting to be safe with COVID and because I have a little bit of a cold, handing them little packages of ashes. And I told them to go home and to put either a little drop of oil or a little drop of water in that bag, and to mark on their forehead a sign of a cross or the back of their hand, whatever they wanted to do. Because we all know, from dust we have come, to dust we shall return. Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent. It calls us to focus our discipleship during this season in a way that maybe we don't do otherwise. Now, Lent is 5 weeks, 5 Sundays. One of the great things about modern study and science and thought about habit formation is this: that if you do something for 60 days, it will become a habit. And if you stop doing it, you will miss doing it. So I encourage you to use this season of Lent well, to not miss out or to forget the time, but to really use it well. And here are 2 suggestions how to use the next 5 weeks, the season of Lent, well. One comes from my own experience, another from the writings of Reverend Adam Hamilton. And just so you know, much of the information that I'm sharing today comes from the United Methodist General Board of Church and Society, who have a wonderful website that includes information about Ash Wednesday. So here are the suggestions, real fast. 1, give something up during the season of Lent. That's a familiar concept for many, but make it something that causes us to sacrifice. I said on Sunday morning when I was preaching this past week that maybe we want to give up something for Lent, but it should be more meaningful than chocolate. And several people after church stopped me and said, Dale, you don't like chocolate. You don't know how hard it is to give up chocolate. I always tried to give up pizza, but I never succeeded. So I came upon something that I think is really important and thoughtful. One writer, and I forget exactly who it was, suggested we give up criticism, gossip, backbiting, telling jokes that make people feel less than what they are, either based on gender or ability or economic status or race. Then maybe we give up something that causes us to make fun of people in terms of how they differ from ourselves. In doing so, in giving up something that is already negative, maybe by the time that Lent ends, we'll have given it up totally. To take on something new is a new way of thinking, be that an act of discipleship or something in terms of our relationships with others. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many of us as white persons have friends from different cultural, ethnic realities. And how many of us ever invite them over to our homes and sit and have dinner with them? Ted, I know that you have a family here in the church who is Asian, and you've developed a close relationship. You and Arlene have developed a close relationship with them. And so I applaud you for that. But many families don't have that. So I would encourage you during this season of Lent to build relationships with people who are different than ourselves. If all we do is have at our homes people who look just like us, think just like us, act just like us, speak just like us, then we quickly become very boring. We don't learn and grow. So take on some new active discipleship, some new active relationship. Maybe if we serve in some fashion, we'll get to see people who are homeless in a different light. Or maybe if we work at a place where there's pregnant teenagers, maybe we'll see what happens to a young mother in a different way. But something that enlarges our compassion, our heart, and doesn't necessarily serve to reinforce our presuppositions. So how do we do this according to Adam Hamilton? Let me suggest the 5 things that he says to do really, really quickly. And he mentions these in his book called The Walk, which I think is one of his best books. His best book I still think is one of the Lord's Prayer. But The Walk is very, very good. First, pray 5 times a day. When you get out of bed, thank God for the day. When you eat breakfast, thank God for their food. Lunch and dinner the same. When your day comes to an end, thank God for the day, whether it's been good or bad. That's 5 times of praying. And if you want to add more, if you want to pray the Lord's Prayer at some point, by all means do it. But use a minimum of 5 times a day. And all of Hamilton's practices will focus, there are 5 practices, will focus on that sense of 5. Secondly, read 5 verses of the Bible a day. Now you can read more. No one's going to penalize you for reading the Bible more. But I'm afraid that there is a growing sense in which we don't, even as Christians, read and know the Bible. I think that we need to be persons of the book because that book is alive and tells vital stories and calls us to a deeper faith in Christ and helps us to see that there's a different way, and that way is the way of Jesus. And if you ask me, I would start with Psalms or Proverbs, but particularly the Gospel of Mark. Don't start with Genesis, that'll be very confusing. But start with Psalms, Proverbs, or Mark. Number 3, service. 5 acts of service each day. Now, it's not that we're keeping count, but we don't want to just do one and say, oh, I've got it done. But we want to develop habits and ways of being together and living. So those 5 acts of service, whether they be holding the door, helping someone to cross the street, carrying out someone's groceries, helping someone clean up their yard, however long or short they are, service reminds us that we are called to be servants first. Jesus says the greatest of all is the servant of all. The last shall be first and the first shall be last. We're reminded of the value and importance of service. Number 4, financial giving. Financial giving is important because we as organizations like churches and missions and civic groups and agencies that serve the homeless or specific populations, we all have financial needs. We want to continue to do the ministry that's important, but to do it, we have to have your income. We have to have your generosity. So thank you in advance for what you do to help others through your financial giving. You might say, well, I barely have enough for me. Start somewhere. It's beneficial to us to say, we don't need everything we see or want, that the stuff that we have will soon decay and go away, and that in turn, we can release some of our monies to God. When we do that, when we trust God in that way, our faith grows. And while I can't issue this as a promise, what I do believe is that God will supply everything we have. And that happens because God is faithful, but also because sometimes when we're giving, our wants, our needs diminish. Prayer, Bible reading, service, financial giving, finally worship. Worship really is the foundation of all this. Knowing and expressing to God our thanks, our appreciation for who God is, it causes us to focus our attention on God, not ourselves. Worship lifts us up. Worship is that which says God matters first, and everything else comes in second. Because when we establish our priorities in that manner, then God has the ability to work in our lives. So I encourage you to regular daily worship through reading a devotional book, through attending church or synagogue on Saturday or Friday or Sunday, through doing the things that help us to worship, to say God is worthy of our worship. Lent is a season of 5 weeks, starting on Ash Wednesday, which I believe when you see this podcast would actually have been yesterday. I'm encouraging all persons in our congregation to read the devotional book, Unrevealed Until Its Season. It's by a friend of mine by the name of Rev Dr. James Howe, the pastor of Myers Park United Methodist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. James is a wonderful pastor, a great Christian, a very fine writer and man. And what he does is each day he takes a song that we sing and talks about how that song is a part of our Lenten practice and discipline and draws us closer to Christ. But there are many other devotional books out there. Jesus calling others, my utmost for his highest. Do something during the season of Lent. Don't let this time pass. Don't look back and say, oh, I wish I had. Seize it today, practice a Lenten discipline, more than one if you'd like, and see your life changed and transformed by God. God will always faithfully show up, even if we don't. Have a wonderful day, and may you and I, and all of us together, practice a good Lent. Amen.